All right, we've got our spindles all painted up for today on Eric 62. And keep in mind now that if normally you want to trial fit these things and make sure that they're what you want and everything's good to go, because once you paint them, you cannot take them back. So on this cross member right here, what I've decided to do is just cut it out all together. It's just going to be easier to work on it after it's out. And so I'm going to do that. We'll cut that out today. We'll get that on there. We'll get this whole front end back on and roll it out the door. Stay tuned. All right, when we're putting in our cross member here, what we have to do is, you might notice there's a gap right here, okay? So if we were to tighten these bolts here, or if we were to tighten these bolts right here first, before we tighten our bottom ones, then we won't be able to get rid of that gap there. So we have to tighten the bottom ones first, close up that gap, and then tighten these side ones. And when we're doing it, we're going to be doing it kind of like we're doing a head on an engine. We don't just grab one nut and tighten it down until it's tight and that's it. We're going to snug them up, snug these up, snug these up, snug these up. Just go around and tighten them up, and then we don't have to worry about this getting torqued up when we bolt up. So I don't remember if I mentioned or not, but most of these holes will line up, and then you just have to drill out a few. So what will happen is that 2 of these here will line up, and you'll have to drill 1 hole out into the cross member here. And then this hole here, I think, was already here, and I just had to drill this one, I believe, and then these 2 on the bottom, and that was it. So now we'll go ahead and stick our lower control arm on, and what you want to notice on this is that it's got a little divot right there. So that little divot goes onto this pin right here. Make sure you get it on that, because if you get it sideways or whatever, then not good. our lower control arms on there. Now we can get our upper control arms on, and you'll notice that you got this guy right here. Okay, so you see how that has a convex shape there? That convex shape goes right into this convex shape. Okay, so we put these guys on first, and then I typically put in some shims here, and I'll put like 2 or 3 in the front and like 4 or 5 in the back, and that's just how you normally see these aligned when they get done. It's some variance of that. There's generally always more in the back than there is in the front by 1 or 2. So I'll just set that up basic, and then we can take it to the alignment shop and have it set up the rest of the way. Here we are looking at a 2-inch drop spring. Now, back in the day, what we would do is you just cut a spring, and you know, if you're in South Dakota and you're 16 years old and you're broke as a joke, or you just don't give a damn, just cut the spring, I guess. But the problem with that is that if you do that, okay, first of all, you'll notice that the top here is a little bit different. Okay, so this is a little bit smaller, and this fits into I don't know, bracket, I guess, that juts down out of the top of our control arm and holds this centered here. On the bottom, you'll want to notice how this spring here, it ends up kind of flat. So I could actually take this and I can set it like that, and it'll stand up, pretty much. But what would happen is if I were to cut, and let's just say I wanted to take you know, this much. So then if I was to cut this right here, then you'll notice that the angle right here is not going to be the same. It's not going to be flat towards the bottom, and it won't stand up. If I cut 1 or 2 off, it'll just fall over. And what happens is that you'll see like a little bit of a notch right here, and then it'll kind of come out like that. And so that bottom spring, that fits right into that notch, and then this is basically flat, but it just has the same exact profile as the bottom of our spring, so that it sits in here. So if you cut your spring, you cut it at the bottom, and you'll put the same, you want to cut it in the same line. So in other words, if I was going to cut this, I don't really want to cut it on the other side of the spring down here. I want to cut it right here, and I want to keep this to go into the same spot in the lower control arm. So I have to cut either here or I have to cut here. And like I said, it will work. But what happens is that since it's not exactly flat and stuff, it will get kind of twerky, and it'll grind in there, and it'll make popping noises and stuff like that sometimes. If you got to do it, you know, you can go buy these rubber dishes that fit in the bottom, and they'll help compensate for that some, but then they'll also lift you up some, so you have to cut an extra spring off in order to compensate for it. So in other words, all that's a bit of a drag. I think drop springs 2 inchers run $120 a pair, $140 a pair, something like that. So it's not too bad of a deal, really, and you could go to the swap meet and different things like that and find better prices. Craigslist is always fun. Here is your upper control arm. What are they called? Ball joints? Yeah. Here is your upper control arm ball joint. You're going to want to put this on top of your control arm, down on the bottom, and generally you want to take your nuts here, your bolts, and go up and have your nut on top. Reason being is that if you have these nuts on the bottom, sometimes they'll rub up against your rubber right here and they'll cause it to leak. Alright, so I don't know if you caught all that part or not, but what we did is first you get your spring and you trial fit it up in here and you get how it feels up in there when it's in the center. Then we get our lower control arm, we put it on our jack here, we got our spring up in there, we bring this up nice and easy, we watch our fingers, we bring it up, we get it in our little socket right there, that's all cool. Now we get our spindle here and we bolt it to the top, but we only put it on by about 4 or 5 threads. Enough to hold it on for sure, but we don't want to have it tight because we have to push this down so that we can get threads on here. Now after we get these on and everything, then we can tighten these down. Now we're not going to do that right now because we want to test fit all this first before. So I'm just going to leave those kind of loose and then we'll make sure everything's copacetic and then blah 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 blah. Now I like to have my shims in here and tightened up and everything before I do the spring and all because it's more difficult to do it after. I go to Harbor Freight a lot, and they got this thing, I think it's like $5, man. So what you do is you get your bearings, and remember that we checked these. They don't have any scores in them, they're not a dark gunmetal gray color or anything like that. They're nice and shiny, chrome looking, and they don't have any defects on them. And so what you do is you get this cool little thing here and we clean this off. Again, when you clean off your bearings, you don't want to use, you don't want to get crazy about it. You don't want to put wax and grease or gas or acetone or anything like that. You don't want to get them knack clean. You want to make sure that they're clean of sand and this and that and the other. But if you get them too clean, then it's not good. So anyway, the bottom of this has a Zerk fitting. You just put a Zerk fitting on there. You pump the grease through here until you see it pump out of the bearings. And then after it's really puffed out of their fat, we'll take it out and do the next bearing, so on and so forth. When we take your rotors out of most packages, it'll be real greasy stuff, this stuff. So wax grease this, acetone it, brake cleaner, what have you, before you put your brake shoes on. Otherwise it can make it more likely to squeak and stuff. Also, generally, if you can, you want to turn these before you put them on because they might have been sitting around for a long time, etc., etc. But if you don't have a brake lathe, you know, because what happens is that if they're uneven, when you put on your brakes, you get a vibration. So it's a drag that put the whole thing together and then find out that they're not even and you've got a vibration. However, 99% of the time they're straight. So we don't have a lathe in here. We're not going to turn them. So we got this all greased up nice, and now we're going to put our seal in. So we want to make sure that it's right, first of all, so that looks good there. And then we want to make sure that it's also correct for this. Okay, that's looking good. So now we can go ahead and install it. Now you're going to be doing this with the rubber up towards you. And really you should get one of these things from Harbor Freight again, and it goes on there and you just hammer it down. It puts it on nice and even. It's like $19.95, $11.95, I don't know. A seal press, I think they call it. But I'm going to show you how to do it the old school way, because that's the way we do it here. And so I'm going to put a little bit of grease on this, I'll put a little bit of grease on this, and then I'm going to get a hammer and I'm just going to lightly tap it down, and I'm just going to keep going in a circle, and I'm just going to bring it down really nice and slow, because if I damage this, then the grease will leak and etc., etc. All right, I was hoping to be rolling by the end of the day, but I knew I more than likely wouldn't make it because I don't have any front wheels. But everything's looking good, and I just put this on here momentarily. We're going to be putting the power steering on there with a kit that we got from Brothers. But we are not doing that just yet, so we'll see y'all tomorrow.